Young girl uncovers shocking secret about Arab millionaire's dark marriage. Hook asterisk. What if everything you thought you knew about wealth and power was just a lie? A young girl stumbles upon a dark secret that could cost her everything. But the question remains, can anyone truly escape the clutches of the darkness that lurks within? Stay with us till the end, because what happens next will shock you. Mira had always been curious about the wealthy Arab businessman, Amir Al-Fayed. She had seen him around the luxurious hotel where she worked, his dark eyes always hidden behind designer sunglasses. The first time they spoke, it was nothing special. He asked for a room upgrade, and she smiled, obliging without question. But something about him lingered in her mind. A mystery, an enigma wrapped in wealth and power. His wife was a shadow in his life, barely seen, always quiet. Amir's home was a palace, a labyrinth of corridors, marble floors, and high ceilings that echoed. Mira had been invited there once to assist with an event. She had marveled at the opulence, the gold accents, the flickering chandeliers, but her curiosity grew more than she expected. She couldn't help but wonder about the wife, the elusive woman who seemed to drift in the background. She'd heard whispers, rumors, but nothing solid. One evening after the event, she stayed behind to clean. The hallway was empty, and the house felt unusually quiet. Myra's heart raced as she passed a small, closed door near the end of the hallway. There was a faint sound from inside, soft, muffled cries. Her breath hitched, but she pushed forward. Was it the wife? Her instinct told her to leave, to not get involved, but her curiosity won. Mira carefully turned the door handle and stepped inside. The room was dim, the air thick with a strange scent. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books, odd trinkets, and strange symbols. But in the center of the room was a large, ornate mirror. It stood there, reflecting nothing but shadows. At first, she saw nothing unusual, but then she caught the reflection of a figure, faint, distorted. Her breath caught in her throat. The woman was there, Amir's wife, but she wasn't alone. A man, tall and cloaked, stood behind her, whispering in her ear. The woman's face was pale, drained of color, her eyes hollow, staring straight ahead. Myra's hand trembled as she reached for the door. She couldn't tear her gaze away. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the shadows were reaching out to her. The door slammed shut behind her. Mira gasped, stumbling back. The room was now completely silent, the mirror reflecting only her frightened face. She didn't understand. What had she seen? What was happening in this house? Myra's heart pounded in her chest. She stumbled away from the door, the cold sweat on her skin chilling her further. The hallway seemed longer now, the silence more suffocating. Her legs shook, threatening to give way beneath her. She needed to leave, but her mind raced. What had she just witnessed? The woman, Amir's wife, wasn't just a prisoner of the house. She had been marked, controlled, bound to something darker than Mira could understand. Mira glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing behind her. But the hallway was empty. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had to get out. Her hand reached for the front door, but it didn't open. Locked. No sound of footsteps, no movement from the other side. A sense of dread crawled over her skin. The house, once so grand, now felt like a prison. Mira stepped back, her eyes scanning the walls. Was there another way out? Her fingers brushed against the edge of a painting hanging crookedly on the wall. The frame clicked. A hidden door. She gasped, her pulse racing. With shaking hands, she pushed it open. A narrow staircase led down into darkness. The smell of damp earth and dust filled her nose. There was no turning back now. She descended into the blackness, her footsteps silent on the cold stone. At the bottom, a faint light flickered from beneath another door. Mira approached it, every instinct screaming at her to turn around. But she couldn't. Not now. She pushed the door open. Inside was a dimly lit chamber, lined with strange, ancient symbols etched into the stone walls. In the center of the room stood a large stone altar, covered in dark red stains. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw the figure standing beside it, Amir. But he wasn't the man she had seen every day. This Amir was different, his face twisted in some ancient, cruel expression. His eyes were black, lifeless, as if the man she knew was no longer there. Mira froze. Her heart thundered in her chest. The woman, Amir's wife, was kneeling before the altar, her body contorted unnaturally, as if under the force of some unseen power. The whispers from earlier now echoed in Myra's mind. They were real. The ritual, the darkness, it was happening right before her eyes. Myra's body screamed to run, but she couldn't move. She was trapped in this nightmare. The air in the chamber thickened, oppressive and cold. Myra's breath came in shallow gasps as she stood frozen in place. She could see it now. Amir wasn't just a businessman. He was something darker, a puppet master, controlling the shadows that clung to the walls. The wife, was she even still human? Her body jerked, a sound of agony escaping her lips. Myra's heart raced. She couldn't tear her eyes away. The scene felt unreal, like something out of a nightmare. But it wasn't a dream. It was happening. Mira took a hesitant step forward, her foot tapping against the cold stone floor. The sound echoed, sharp and loud, breaking the spell of silence that had held her captive. For a moment, Amir's head turned toward her, his eyes locked with hers, empty and cold. A chill ran down her spine. He saw her. He knew she was there. "Leave," he hissed, his voice like a serpent's whisper. Myra's body trembled. She wanted to run, to escape, but her legs refused to obey. Something held her in place, an unseen force, pressing against her chest, tightening her throat. The woman on the altar twisted again, her face now a mask of torment. Mira had to do something. She couldn't let this continue. But what could she do against such power? Her mind raced. There had to be a way. Amir stepped forward, his every movement deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. "You shouldn't have seen this," he murmured, his lips curling into a twisted smile. He raised his hand, and the room seemed to darken even further, shadows creeping toward him like they were alive. Myra's instinct screamed at her to move. She darted toward the altar, desperate to get closer to the wife, to somehow break whatever hold Amir had over her. But the closer she got, the more suffocating the air became. The whispers grew louder, rising in pitch, like a chorus of voices calling her name. Her vision blurred, her thoughts scattered. Suddenly, a hand shot out from the altar, cold fingers gripping her wrist. Mira gasped, her body jerking back, but the grip tightened. She looked down, and in the dim light, she saw the wife's face, twisted, unrecognizable. "Help me," the woman croaked, her voice barely audible, a rasping whisper. Myra's pulse thundered in her ears as she struggled to break free. But the woman's grip only grew stronger. Her nails dug into Myra's skin, sharp and desperate. "Please," the wife whispered again, her voice thick with anguish. And then, in a voice that wasn't her own, the woman spoke, her words echoing through the room like a terrible chant. "Only one can leave this place. Only one can survive." Myra's blood ran cold at the words. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing. She tried to pull her arm free, but the woman's grip was iron-tight. The shadows around her seemed to pulse, alive, swirling. Amir stood motionless, watching. His eyes gleamed with something ancient, something far beyond human comprehension. Mira could feel the pressure closing in on her, the very air thickening, suffocating her with each breath she took. "Let go of me," she gasped, her voice trembling. But the woman's fingers only tightened, the nails digging deeper into Myra's skin. The chanting continued, growing louder, more frantic. Only one can survive. Only one can leave. Myra's pulse was deafening in her ears. The woman's words echoed like a curse, each repetition stabbing into her mind. She could feel the weight of the room pressing in, the darkness wrapping around her like a noose. Terror surged through her. She was trapped. Amir stepped closer, his presence almost suffocating. "You shouldn't have come here," he said softly, his voice cold and venomous. The room seemed to close in on Mira, the walls narrowing, the shadows creeping closer, reaching for her. Her head spun. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She had to get out. She had to. Suddenly, the woman let go. Mira stumbled backward, her arm burning from where the woman's nails had marked her. The chanting stopped. Silence. For a moment, nothing moved. Myra's chest heaved as she caught her breath, but she knew she couldn't stay. She turned and bolted for the door, her feet slipping on the cold stone as she scrambled up the narrow staircase. Her pulse pounded in her ears, her vision blurry as she raced through the dark hallways, desperate to escape. She reached the front door, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the lock. It clicked open. Mira shoved the door wide and burst into the night, gasping for air as the cool breeze hit her face. She didn't stop running. She didn't look back. But as she fled into the darkness, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her, something that had been awakened by her discovery. The air was still thick with the weight of what she had seen, and she knew deep in her bones that she had only escaped for now. But the terrible secret of Amir Al-Fayed and the woman trapped in his world would haunt her forever, because some doors, once opened, could never truly be closed. Myra's legs burned as she ran, her breath ragged in her chest, but she couldn't stop. The darkness pressed in, wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. Every step felt like an eternity, every shadow a threat. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see Amir's face, his eyes burning with that unearthly coldness. But nothing. The night was still, eerily quiet, as if the world had paused to watch her flee. She reached the edge of the estate and stumbled into the overgrown garden, the path barely visible in the low light. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. What had she just seen? How could Amir be connected to something so dark, so ancient? And the wife, what had become of her? Had she truly been the prisoner of some kind of curse? Myra's thoughts raced, but she couldn't stop running, couldn't stop the pull of panic. Her heart hammered in her chest as she reached the gate, her fingers trembling as she grasped the cold metal. But just as she pushed against it, she heard it. A sound. A whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. Only one can survive. Mira froze, her blood running cold. The voice wasn't from the past. It was here. Now. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the garden. But there was nothing there. The air had thickened. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, warping as if alive. "Get away from me," she whispered, her voice shaking. But the whisper came again, this time louder. "Only one can leave." Myra's chest tightened. The ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble, and for a moment she thought she could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. She spun around, expecting to see Amir or his wife, but the space was empty. Her skin prickled with a sensation of being watched, and then she saw it. A figure in the distance, standing just beyond the garden's edge. A dark silhouette, unmoving, silent. Myra's heart skipped a beat as she took a cautious step back. The figure didn't move, didn't react. But she knew with a bone-deep certainty that it was no ordinary person. It was the same darkness, the same malevolent force that had filled Amir's house. The whisper came again, louder now, as if it was right beside her ear. "Only one can survive." A chill shot through Myra's spine. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The figure took a single step forward, and just like that, the world around her shifted. The garden, the estate, the very air seemed to warp and twist. Mira blinked, disoriented. The figure was gone. The night was silent again, eerily so. But the whisper remained, closer. Only one can leave. Myra's pulse hammered in her throat. It wasn't over. She wasn't safe. The darkness had followed her. And it wouldn't stop until it claimed its prize. Myra's legs shook, her body trembling from more than just fear. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she tried to steady herself. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't let that thing catch her. But every direction felt like a trap now, the world around her shifting like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Her eyes darted across the garden, the trees now twisted in grotesque shapes. The moonlight filtered through the leaves in strange, angular patterns, as though the night itself had become a puzzle, a maze she couldn't escape. Her skin crawled with the sensation of being watched. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Only one can leave. The voice wasn't coming from the air anymore. It was inside her head, swirling in her thoughts like a curse. Mira clenched her fists, trying to block it out, trying to focus. She needed to move. She couldn't think, couldn't listen to the voice. But as her feet hit the ground, it was as if the earth itself was pulling at her, dragging her down. She stumbled, caught in some unseen force. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it. The figure. It was back, standing at the edge of the garden, motionless, its outline dark against the moonlight. Her blood ran cold. She took a step back, heart racing, but the figure didn't move. It stood there, waiting, watching. Myra's breath hitched in her throat. She had to get away, And then the whispers stopped. Silence. The figure stepped forward, not with movement, but as if it was simply appearing closer, 1 inch at a time, like it was slowly unraveling the distance between them. Myra's entire body froze. The air felt thick, with some heavy, suffocating presence. She couldn't see its face, only the shadows that seemed to swirl around it, dark and infinite. It was closing in, and now she knew. It wasn't Amir. It wasn't the wife. It was something worse, something older, something that existed beyond this world. Myra's mind raced, trying to recall everything she'd seen in that cursed house, the symbols, the darkness, the ritual, the words. Only one can survive. A flash of realization hit her like a lightning bolt. The truth. It wasn't a choice. The ritual had never been about the wife. It had always been about her. Mira was the one who had been chosen. She wasn't running to survive. She was running to be the sacrifice. Terror gripped her heart. She turned and ran, faster now, not even caring where she was going. She didn't look back, but she could feel it, its presence closing in, wrapping around her like a noose. Her steps grew heavier, slower. The darkness was everywhere now, pushing her, pulling her, suffocating her. And then, just as she reached the gate, just as her hands grasped the cold metal once more, it happened. The shadows engulfed her, dragging her into the night, into the void. Her scream echoed into the silence, swallowed by the blackness. And the garden stood still again, empty. The whispers faded, and the door had closed. The silence stretched on, as if nothing had ever happened. The garden, once alive with the frantic rush of Myra's footsteps, was now still. The moon hung in the sky, indifferent, casting long shadows that slithered across the ground. The gate remained open, as though it had always been that way, but there was no sign of Mira, no trace of the girl who had once been there, gasping for air, desperate to escape. The whispers had faded, but the air still felt thick, laden with something terrible, something unseen. The darkness clung to the edges of the estate, as though it had never let go. In the distance, the The door to the mansion stood ajar, a faint light flickering from within, but no one dared approach it, and no one ever would again. As the night drew on, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something that would never come. The figure, standing just beyond the garden, was gone, but the house, it still loomed silent, waiting for the next soul to stumble upon its cursed door. And inside, beyond the walls, Amir's laughter echoed softly in the night, a sound that was not entirely human, because the terrible secret was never meant to stay hidden forever. It was part of the house, part of the darkness, and now it would wait. It would always wait. For the next one, the days passed since Myra's disappearance. The estate stood as it always had, an imposing monument of wealth and power. No one spoke of her anymore. No one dared to. But rumors began to stir. Whispers that Mira had never really left. Some said she was seen wandering the edges of the garden at night, her face pale, eyes hollow. Others claimed to hear her voice, soft and distant, calling out from the darkness. The hotel she worked at closed its doors, the staff mysteriously disappearing one by one. But still, no one came close to Amir Al-Fayed's mansion. The shadows around it seemed to grow thicker with every passing day. It was as if the house was slowly becoming a part of the world, sinking deeper into the earth, its presence undeniable. Amir, meanwhile, continued his life, moving about the city with his cold, calculating demeanor. He still held his events, still made deals, but now there was something different about him. A quiet sense of satisfaction, as if a great burden had been lifted. One evening, as the sun began to set, a woman arrived at the gates of the estate. She was young, her face a picture of innocence, unaware of the darkness that lay ahead. She had come for a job, a simple task, deliver a package. She knew nothing of the rumors, nothing of the history that weighed heavily on this place. She approached the mansion's door, her heart beating just a little faster, sensing something was wrong. But she shrugged it off, smiling politely at the butler who answered. The door creaked open, the dark hallways stretching before her. "Just leave the package in the study," the butler said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The woman nodded, walking inside. She wasn't aware of the cold chill creeping up her spine, of the shadows following her footsteps. As she placed the package on the desk, the air in the room grew dense. And then she heard it, the softest whisper. "Only one can survive." She froze, her breath caught in her throat. The door slammed shut behind her, and Amir Al-Fayed's laughter echoed through the mansion. The woman stood frozen, her hands still resting on the desk where the package had been placed. The whisper echoed in the air, so faint at first, but then louder, sharper, like an invisible force pressing in on her. "Only one can survive." Her heart raced in her chest. She felt the temperature drop, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. The room, once grand and regal, now seemed suffocating, the walls closing in around her. She turned, but the door was already gone, replaced by an expanse of shadow, as if the house itself had shifted. Her breath caught in her throat as she backed away from the desk, her eyes darting around the room. The silence was thick, heavy, and the whisper lingered, twisting in the air like a dark promise. And then she saw him, Amir Al-Fayed, standing just beyond the threshold of the room, his figure framed by the doorway. His eyes glinted with that same cold, empty stare she had heard rumors of. "You shouldn't have come here," he said softly, his voice like velvet, but cold as stone. The woman's mouth went dry. She could feel the weight of the air, the suffocating dread building with each passing second. She tried to speak, to call for help, but no words came. Amir stepped forward, his movement deliberate, his gaze never leaving her. And the room seemed to warp once more, the shadows growing darker, consuming the light. "You've crossed a line," he murmured, "and now the house has claimed you, as it claimed all who came before you. She tried to move, but her body wouldn't obey. It was as if she were rooted to the spot, as if the house itself held her in its grip. And then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, the shadows surged, overwhelming her, swallowing her whole. The woman's scream was muffled, lost in the vast emptiness of the mansion. Outside, the moon rose high, casting its light over the estate as if nothing had ever changed. The door closed with a quiet click, and Emir Al-Fayed stood silently in the dark, his cold eyes reflecting the endless, unyielding night. The house waited, as it always had, for the next one.